Our story begins as we're introduced to the new civil servants of the War Office. Lucy Yamagami, a reliable but kind of clueless girl, Yutaka Hazeby, a laid-back guy who excels at everything, and Saya Miyoshi, a kind woman who sometimes says the truth without thinking. Their supervisor is Teishi Ichimiya, who, despite the fact that he's worked there for 8 years already, claims to be a newcomer and asks them what to do instead. As Hazeby is a huge slacker, he ends up asking annoying Ichimiya about multiple places to slack off at. Though Ichimiya then asks Miyoshi if she has any questions, she's nervous as it's her first job, so as Ichimiya is clueless, again, Lucy tries to cheer her up by saying that it's normal as she just left high school, though Miyoshi reveals that she's actually a college graduate to her embarrassment. Later, Lucy works at the welfare benefits office as a woman named Megumi Chihaya teaches her work, though she ends up teaching nothing as only people who seek other offices go there. After that, she's told to fill up a document but becomes hesitant as she has to put in her name. So going to deliver it, she sees Hazeby, who's doing really well, but who annoys Ichimiya again, who finds out he got an email from a customer, and then sees Miyoshi, who's trapped talking to an old woman. Though then Hazeby interrupts her and asks for her email, only for Ichimiya to drag him away. She then gets to the desk as Hazeby and Miyoshi run into her, telling her that work's been rough, though for Hazeby, it's because he hasn't slacked off. Miyoshi wonders if they're not cut out for this, so to fight that, Lucy decides to work very hard and ends up doing really well, though ends up tired. So Chihaya tells her to relax, so she lays against her desk, though this only makes her gigantic stand out. Later, Ichimiya tells Lucy that she only put her last name in the form, so she ends up revealing that when she was born, her parents got a huge list of names to choose from, but they ended up doing something very They chose all of them, as she says her name is Lucy Kimiko Aki Eri Shiori, Rin Yoshiho Chihoko Ayano Fumika Chitos Yamagami, and then reveals that she's working at the ward office out of revenge, as she wants to find the employee who accepted her name and say something to him. Though she ends up mocked because of that, as Hazeby pulls her ahoj and tells her to go get lunch, though he calls her by her first name, so she hits his face with a book. Later, she tries to introduce herself to her coworkers, but ends up finding out that they all know her name already, to her anguish. Later, she runs into the others and tells them this, so Miyoshi tries to cheer her up, but to no avail as Lucy says she has a normal name. But she then decides to snap out of being sad, though then Hazeby calls her Lucy again, so she gets mad and tells him not to, so he asks if she'd prefer if he called her by her full name, so she throws another book at his face. Chihaya then arrives and hands her name tag, though becomes shocked as her name there is Yamagami Lucy, abbreviated. Later, they talk about how people hate civil servants, as they get paid from their tax money and are slackers, like Hazeby, who's again getting someone's email. After that, Lucy discusses this with Ichimiya, though he says that not everybody is hated, but the only example he can think of is Miyoshi, who's trapped talking to the same lady again, though she then leaves only for an exact lady to come and begin talking to her. Meanwhile, later, Hazeby tries to slack off but gets constantly stopped by Ichimiya. After that, Lucy sees that Miyoshi is under attack by a client, so she decides to help, but she gets caught in the crossfire now. But then, Hazeby arrives, who's actually able to calm her down, as she finds him handsome and redirects her to the proper office, though then Ichiyama drags him there as well as that's where he's supposed to be. After that, Lucy attends a costumer as she thinks on Hazeby slacking off, so the costumer gets mad saying that civil servants should do their job properly, but this makes her think on her name being approved back then, so she explodes and aggressively agrees with her, which the entire office hears, so she apologizes embarrassed. Then she has another customer who ends up mad as he forgot to stamp a document and is told that they can't submit it like that. Miyoshi and Ichimiya see this, but the latter is clueless as to what to do again. But then, Hazeby arrives and calmly explains why they can't accept his document, so the customer leaves after that. Lucy thanks him for this, though gets mad as Hazeby makes fun of her name again. But regardless, she decides not to get mad so easily, but Hazeby, being the third generation of civil servants in his family, gives her advice, telling her that for them being scolded is the #1 job. Though then she sees the staff behaving well with the previous customers, so she says she'll try harder at her job. Though then Hazeby tries to ask for her email again, calling her by her first name again, but as she gets mad, he tells her he can name him Tom. But this only makes her throw another book at him, which he blocks this time, but this only utter angers her and makes her chase after him in anger. EPSOD 2. Lucy finds Miyoshi hiding, though ends up found out anyways by the old lady who won't shut up. She later explains what's happening to the others, but hides from shame as Hazeby tells her she can't do her work if she hides. So Ichimiya tries to cheer her up, so he compliments the newcomers, but he ends up saying that Hazeby does his job better than him already, so he ends up depressed as well. After that, Miyoshi's still sad, so Lucy and Hazeby decide to help her, as he tells her to act like she needs help so she doesn't feel alone. So she pretends to drop her documents for this, but then gets embarrassed as she sees that Hazeby is actually filming her. So later, she decides to talk to Chihaya instead about this, who stares at her beasts for a bit. After talking though, she asks Lucy if she can cover for her tomorrow, as she has something to do. And the next day, as she does her job, Chihaya actually comes to the office in cosplay, as she forgot to give Lucy the storage keys. She explains that she loves cosplaying, and as she's a temporary employee, she can easily take days off. The next day during break, Hazeby looks interested in Chihaya's manga, so she lets her borrow all asterisk of the manga of the magical flowers. Hazeby then arrives and recognizes this as it's also game, as he says that he plays games like Pokemon, Mariko Kart, Dokumemo. Then Lucy asks her if it isn't frustrating for her to not be able to dress flamboyantly at work as a civil servant, but she says that cosplay isn't about that, as she says she's wearing a civil servant cosplay right now, and that they're doing so as well. So Lucy ends up embarrassed at this. Though then, Chihaya tells her that she dresses plainly, to which Lucy expounds that she's not really interested in clothes. So later they talk about this, as Chihaya tells her the issue is rather that she can't find clothes that fit her gigantic. Lucy tries to say they're nothing special, but as Chihaya says F-cupped, she becomes glad as she thinks they look that small, to Chihaya's concern. But then she tells her to do an cosplay with her, explaining that she'll be able to wear anything once she experiences that, though Lucy tells her she'll think about it. Though then, they notice Ichimiya received a call worried, so he warns them that the nuisance is coming, but it hears that, as we see it's a high schooler, Toko, a regular there who's a welfare nut, as she says memorizing welfare laws is her hobby. So she decides to test the new employees to see if they can do their work properly, as Ichiyama warns them to not provoke her much, explaining that she knows way more than most professionals, and then she demonstrates it by scolding him on his work as he falls to his knees. But then Hazeby decides to test her first, betting her that if he answers a question correctly, she'll give him her email. She accepts, but to her and everyone's surprise, he answers correctly, so she reluctantly gives him it as he dances. She then tests Miyoshi pretending to be a customer, but Miyoshi gets scared of her. But then the old lady who always talks to her, Tanaka, sees this and scolds her for this. Lastly, she tries to test Lucy, but she asks for her name first, so she begins reciting it, which makes her yell at her. She ends up frustrated at them, so she demands Ichimiya to educate them properly, but he tries to calm her down. But this makes her cry, so she hugs him, to everyone in the office's surprise, but he calms her down by giving her some welfare guides and some money. But everyone ends up staring at him as they found what her did. But they then find out that Toko is actually his sister. He tries to explain that she wasn't always angry like this, but is unable to, as she always was. And then he explains that this all began when they were younger, when he showed her the ward office and told her that he'd do part-time work there, and she'd be home alone. So she began visiting the ward office after that, and then demanded his brother to work there full-time instead after high school. But as Ikimiya is oblivious, they realize that it's not the ward office she loves, but rather her brother. After that, Miyoshi gets into an argument with Toko, but as Chihaya sees Miyoshi isn't able to express herself properly, she summons a meeting to tackle this, where she tries to have her cosplay at first, but as she doesn't want to, they decide to tackle this head-on. So they go to Toko, but she freezes out of fear, but Toko gets mad at this, but then Miyoshi kindly tells her that her brother will never understand her love for him just by going to the ward office. This shocks Toko and makes her cry, so if his brother comes. But as she can't reveal why she's crying, she decides to hit him and tell him to apologize instead. But then Ichimiya tells her that she's being a bother and sends her home. So sad at this, she says she won't come back anymore. But seeing this, Miyoshi tells Toko to come back anytime so she can educate her. So she angrily responds that she will, as she leaves her no choice. Miyoshi ends up glad, but frustrated at having done that. D3. Ichimiya talks with Chihaya about the newcomers, as he asks if he seems like a reliable senpai to them, only for her to respond that he already failed if he has to ask that to a temporary employer. Though then she mentions that Lucy is clueless, and it can be dangerous, as she recalls that she said she owed her one. So she says she'd have her cosplay, but she only reacted with a smile, though Ichimiya thinks that what's dangerous is actually Chihaya. Later, Ichimiya talks with Lucy about work, but begins having a crisis as he realizes she's better than him when he started. But then he begins trying to pull down her hoj out of habit, as he used to do Toko's hair when she was younger, so he apologizes and leaves. But Toko's been watching all this, so she gets mad at her. Though Lucy then notices that she's here to give lunch to his brother, but Toko lies and says that she's there to talk to her instead. So in fear, Lucy tries to compliment Ichimiya, but Toko gets mad, so she then tries to say he's not that reliable. But this makes it worse, as Toko says that he his life to raise her, though says that he's a terrible brother. Ichimiya then arrives, so she hands him his lunch, but as it's too much, she decides she'll eat with him, which was her plan all along. Later, as Lucy decides she'll do her best like Ichimiya, she stretches but ends up breaking her hooks. So she tries to hide this from everyone, though Chihaya and Miyoshi end up noticing her line looks weird anyways. As she leaves, they realize what happened, but they chose not to help as it'll be too embarrassing for her and might make her not come to work anymore. She then presents some papers to Ichimiya, but Hazeby notices something wrong, but as he says, Ichijima punches him on the face, though after she leaves, she tries to explain that he wanted to ask if her hooks were broken. They later have lunch as she wonders if they noticed, which they all have. But as Ichimiya decides he'll deal with this, Hazeby, to everyone's worry, approaches her and tells her to take the day off, since he's sure she has a cold, which the rest of them follow, though she says she's fine, but after insisting, she finally leaves home. The next day, Lucy comes back and tells them she actually had a slight fever, though everyone ends up talking with the undertone of her real issue, so she ends up confused. Later, Hazeby tells Ichimiya he has an issue as he can't seem to get Lucy's email. Ichimiya questions why he asks for everyone's email, but Hazeby tells him he just collects them, but that he never uses them, but feels at ease if he has a lot, like emergency rations. Though he then sees Lucy and approaches her, but he ends up talking about her ahoj instead, so she leaves, but then realizes he forgot to ask for her email. But as she leaves the office, he decides to give it his all to get the email and goes after her. He follows her to a library, though he tries to excuse it with it being destiny. So he then asks her to go eat with him, but as she says she's not hungry, her stomach growls, and then says that she doesn't have money, but he sees her books are expensive. But she explains that she cuts back on food to buy them. So he then puts one of her books above her reach and tells her he'll let her buy the books if she lets him treat her. So later, they go eat, and after finishing they leave on their own. Though Hazeby then realizes that he forgot to ask for her email again. The next day at work, he helps her get a box, but as she says she would have been able to reach that, he decides to put it further up now, telling her she has to learn to accept others' kindness. But at this, she says that as people tease her for her name. If she asks for help, others will think she can't do anything by herself on top of having a weird name, but they tell her they won't and that nobody cares much about her name. This leaves her wondering if that's true. Later, she tends to a customer with her child, but she begins crying. So Hazeby comes with a bee plush and does ventriloquism with it, calming the child and letting her mom finish her work as Lucy becomes surprised at this. After that, she goes get some documents, but sees that it's raining. Hazeby then approaches her and points it out, but he asks her if she likes rain. But she responds aggressively at this, only to leave after that. After that, Hazeby runs into Miyoshi, who has documents to give to Lucy. Seeing this, he offers her to take them for her. And then at the storage room, Haseb spooks Lucy, though she says she wasn't scared. She covers in fear as a lightning strikes. He realizes that she's scared of them, so he lets her borrow his earbuds so she can ignore the thunder while working as he hands her the documents and leaves. She then goes back and apologizes for taking long, but Chihaya says that it's fine as Haseb already to her what happened, that it took her some time to put her name in a document, as Lucy thinks he's a... Later, she runs into Haseb, who's talking to someone in sign language. She hands him back his earbuds, and they talk as Hazeby reveals that he just learned sign language to help with work, but just so he can slack more. Lucy asks why did he settle for this work as he's talented, so he says that he didn't have anything in particular that interested him, saying that life's sort of boring, but at least it's smooth sailing. He then tells her he can teach her sign language with extra attention to detail, though she completely misses the undertone of this, but she tells him he has to return the favor first, having helped her with the thunder and the child. He doesn't want to do that, so he asks for something impossible. Her cup size. But to his surprise, she actually reveals it, which leaves him dumbfounded as she then runs away. Though he then realizes he forgot to ask for her email again. Chihaya tells Miyoshi she's been taking Lucy's measurements by slipping onto her, though as she's oblivious, she wonders if she just grabbed her from the front. Though then they find Haseb and Lucy holding hands. They're told that he's just teaching her sign language, but as Haseb is too close to her, Chihaya says that's not necessary, but Haseb says that he can't help himself, so she tells him to leave. Chihaya then warns Lucy to be wary of Hasebe, and that minor physical interactions and questions about her body are considered, though Miyoshi realizes she's doing that as well. At this, Lucy says that she won't tell Hasebe her size next time, which shocks them. Later, Chihaya runs into Hazeby, who questions his motives with Lucy, as she says that she can't allow him to get close to her. Though Hasebe thinks this is because she might be into Lucy, it's because she thinks it'll make her cosplay, yelling, "Why does he get to change her clothes all he wants?" Which Tanaka, who was leaving, hears, so she chooses to talk about that to Miyoshi to her utter dismay. Chihaya then says that this makes them rivals, but that she gets her to cosplay to send her pics. He then talks to Miyoshi about what happened, saying that he doesn't have those intentions, but that he wouldn't mind if she cosplayed a nurse though. Lucy then arrives, so he makes sure he didn't hear anything and leaves, and Miyoshi warns her to be careful, of Chihaya rather. Later, Hazeby runs into Lucy, who he annoys first, but then offers her help with her books, saying that it'll be faster this way, so she accepts. Now in the library, Lucy talks about how he is, saying that the fact that he's nice makes him popular. But he asks if she likes him, but as she says she doesn't like him in general, he says she should go out with him. She rejects this though, but he takes it well to her surprise. The next day, Lucy wonders what happened yesterday with Hazeby, trying to convince herself that it was just nothing. The girls then approach her, so she asks them if Hazeby's the kind of guy who would casually hit on anyone, which Kouhai says that he indeed is the kind of guy who has them do all kinds of cosplay, calling him an enemy of women. Though then Miyoshi says that the other day when asking for her email, Hazeby told her he never asked anyone out himself, leaving Lucy dumbfounded. Hazeby then arrives, and as Ichimiya tells him Lucy's acting weird, he tells him he just asked her out yesterday, but that he was rejected, to his surprise. Though he then says that he's devastated and tries to have him do his work for him. Later, at the roof, Hazeby slacks off, but then Lucy approaches him and asks why did he ask her out. But as he says he's not telling someone who rejected him, she explains that she did so because it sounded like a joke if someone boring like her were in a relationship, as Hazeby realizes he was rejected for a very lame reason. But as he asks her out again and gets shot down again, he shrews it off and tells her to continue acting normal around him, which she accepts. But this was a trap, as he asks her to go eat with him as normal co-workers. Later, Lucy wonders about who's their section manager, as she always uses his stamp for documents, but this makes Ichimiya nervous. After that, Hazeby and Miyoshi wonder the same, but as Lucy says he might be a slacker, like Hazeby, they hear a voice calling her rude, but they notice that it's coming from the rabbit on the desk, who then moves and reveals that he's their section manager, Kenzo Momoi, a high-tech stuffed rabbit controlled from afar. He reveals that he used to work with Hazeby's dad as Ichijima and Kouhai arrive, with the former saying that he couldn't talk about Kenzo because of how he looks, though Kenzo says that he uses this form because he's so very shy, though they all say that him being a plush is more embarrassing in unison. Later, while Lucy tells Kouhai that Hazeby has been taking her out a lot, so she hasn't had time to read much. But Kouhai freaks out at this and warns her to be wary of him, though she says they've only been going out as co-workers and to very delicious restaurants. Later, Kouhai talks with Miyoshi about this, but as Kenzo hears this, he tries to intervene, only for Kouhai to stomp him, and then ask if they can't just kill Hasabe. So later, she meets up with Lucy again and tells her to be more concerned of Hasabe's true intentions, otherwise she'll certify her as a... So at night, while eating with him, she tries to find out his true intentions, though by asking if she's trying to make her fat because he's mad she turned him down. But this only makes him call her Yamagami the entire night. The next day, she explains what Hasabe did to the girls, but they also end up calling her Yamagami. Later, Kenzo talks with Ichimiya about the newcomers, as the latter tells him they threw them a welcoming party, but Kenzo gets offended, as he's never been invited to one, so he throws a fit and demands to go drink with the employers. So Ichimiya goes and asks the newcomers to do so, which they find embarrassing, but go regardless. So at night, they go drin as Kenzo says everything's on him, but then says that he has no money, so Ichimiya will pay. Miyoshi, though, reveals she can't drink alcohol, so Kenzo gets mad, but Ichimiya punches him, telling him not to force others to drink. Lucy says she's never been drunk as she finds alcohol bitter, so Kenzo invites her a cocktail, which she finds sweet, but this ends up making her instantly drunk. So they later leave, but Hazeby decides to take Lucy home as she's too drunk. Ichimiya is concerned at this, but as he receives an angry call from his sister, he has to leave home, and Miyoshi escapes in a cab from Kenzo, who wanted to leave with her. Hazeby tries to take Lucy home, but she falls asleep, and as he didn't know her address, he decides to take her somewhere they can sleep, as he looks at plenty of hotels surrounding them. Episode 5. Lucy wakes up in a bed, not remembering what happened, and finds someone next to her. A woman who then wakes up and tells her that she is Hazeby, saying that she was pretending to be a man all along. Though then the real Hazeby comes in and reveals that she's his sister, Kaoru, who likes to play pranks on people. They reveal that Hazeby took her there as her place was close, saying that it wouldn't have been a good idea to stay at a hotel. But she's oblivious of what he means by that, so Kaoru properly explains, which makes her embarrassed. Though we then see a flashback, where Kaoru thought he wanted to have a thing with her and Lucy due to playing many adult games. Lucy apologizes for causing trouble, but Kaoru tells her it's fine and to keep the jacket as the zipper broke because of her. Hazeby and Lucy then walk together, but as Lucy feels bad because of causing trouble to them, she wants to do something in return. But Hazeby decides he'll just save it up as points and use them in a giant favor eventually. The next day, Lucy visits Kaoru, as she wants to return in the favor as well. She's gotten her sweets, but as she can't eat all this, she decides to go visit Hazeby, saying that she now has a gift, but that the gift is Lucy instead, though she's oblivious as to what she means. In the train station, they talk about Kaoru's family, saying that they all are civil servants and happy-go-lucky like Hazeby, though that he's the least hyper of them, which spooks Lucy. They then arrive at his home, but find him wearing glasses at first, which he quickly changes. Now inside, Hazeby asks why did she bring her, so she reveals that she wanted to see him stuck in an awkward situation. So they then talk, but as Lucy saw his games, she shows him one with the cover of a big girl and asked if he thinks women like this exist in the real world, saying that she'd feel relieved if they do, though he just snatches the game away. So then she says she thought he'd be outside in his free days like picking up women, though Hasabe says he hasn't done that recently because he just asked her out. But Hazeby's tired, she decides to leave as his sister says that she had a lot of fun for some reason. The next day at work, Lucy tells Ichimiya that Haseby took her to this pretty lady's place, and that she then went to his place as well, saying that she was shocked because he likes to play this game with big... But Haseby then arrives, so Ichimiya whacks his head. So later, Haseby explains what really happened, though tells Ichimiya he shouldn't get mad for his personal matters. Though then they run into Kouhai scolding Lucy for going with Haseby, as it appears that she's crying, though it's only a hiccup. So Haseby tries to spook her but stops as Kouhai him with his life. Later, Haseby complains to Ichiyama about Kouhai, so he says that it's because of how he behaves, though Haseby tells him that he's the one flirting with the high schooler. Ichiyama gets mad at this, but reveals that he has a girlfriend, though Haseby thinks he means Toko still, though says that he always get dumped right before Christmas. Though we see that Lucy and Kouhai have been hearing all this, so Kouhai reveals that that reason is because Toko's birthday is on Christmas Eve, so as he prioritizes being with his sister in such a huge day for couples, he always get dumped there. And then she reveals she knows all this because she's Ichimiya's girlfriend, though then says that it's a joke, though it's not, leaving Ichimiya almost. Later, in Ichimiya's home, his sister leaves to meet up with Miyoshi, to his surprise as she invited her. After that, Kouhai arrives to his surprise. Meanwhile, Miyoshi meets up with Toko, so they go have a dessert. Miyoshi asks her if she wants to be a civil servant like her brother, so at this, she reveals that Ichimiya his college to become a civil servant to support them, as they didn't have a father, so she'll become one as well, though tries to excuse it as wanting it for herself and not to be with Ichimiya. Meanwhile, Ichimiya has tea with Kouhai, though she ends up frustrated at him not being able to get her jokes despite having dated for a year already, as well as constantly apologizing for everything he does and doesn't, as she f***s him with a table. They talk about how they're hiding their relationship because they're far apart in age, so he tells her she doesn't have to go out of her way to go out with him. But at this, she asks if he wants to break up with him that badly, so she says she'll go home, but goes into Toko's room instead. And then she comes out wearing his sister's uniform, leaving him confused. She then tells him to tell her he loves her, but he can't as she's wearing those clothes, so she decides to take them off, though Ichimiya tries to stop her. Though then Toko arrives. Later, she explains that she wore her uniform as it was nostalgic, while Ichimiya shivers in fear in a corner, though then Kouhai leaves as Ichimiya ends up exhausted. The next day, Haseby teases him with him having told him not to get involved in office affairs, but he reaffirms his stance as he says it's too much trouble while falling exhausted. Episode 6. Lucy runs into Kenzo on the street, so they go to work together. There, he asks her to tie his necktie his daughter bought him, but as she doesn't know how to, Shiya does it instead, though as he says, it's like you're used to tying your boyfriends. She chokes him with it. Haseby then arrives and accidentally steps on Kenzo, who gets mad at all this. So later he talks with Ichimiya, as he tells him he wants to interact with the newcomers more, as he feels there's a wall between them, though Ichiyama says it's because he's a stuffed animal. So he brings Kenzo to Haseby and asks him to carry him on his shoulder while he works, which he embarrassingly accepts, but they then spend the day slacking off. After that, he's now with Lucy, but he can't see her work because of her huge... After finishing, he tells her to be careful of a lot of things. And after that, he now hangs with Miyoshi, but as he says she's tall for a woman and that she has wide shoulders and that he can see below very well, unlike with Lucy, she becomes self-conscious and sulks at this. So later, they end up listening to Tanaka for hours and become exhausted. But then Toko arrives and reprimands her for working with a stuffed animal. After that, he comes to the conclusion that the newcomers have more freedom than in the past, but that it's fine as he says that Haseby's dad used to be very hardworking, but it annoyed the coworkers, as he remembers that he told him they'd get more authority one day, but that his dad punched him because he said that while being a stuffed rabbit. Haseby then arrives as Kenzo tells him he'll always be there for him, but this only makes Haseby punch him. Later, Kenzo hangs out with Ichimiya, as the former wonders what he's lacking to interact properly with the newcomers, and the latter about his sister having friends. They then run into some of them and explain their problems, though they ignore Kenzo, so he asks Miyoshi what's he lacking, so she says shyness, though this only confuses him. And as Ichimiya explains his issue, a high schooler visits the ward, who's revealed to be Kenzo's daughter, Kanan. She went there to give his father his tail, which her mom forgot to put in his new body. Toko then appears there, though she becomes surprised at seeing Kanan there, as they're both friends to Ichimiya's surprise. She asks about the rabbit, but as she can't find out about Kenzo, as she reported, Kanan says it's the new ward mascot, as she then drags her out of there. Kenzo then asks the newcomers if the tail was the thing he was lacking, only for them all to ignore him again. The next day, Miyoshi has to hear to Tanaka again and to Toko's complaints again, as well as Kenzo jumping on her again, so she ends up burnt out. She says to herself that she wants to quit, but Haseby hears this, but she explains that it's because she thinks she might be regretting not having finished graduate school, revealing that she asked her parents to let her go there, but that they lied by saying her father was ill, so she had to go back home. So Haseby consoles her by saying that, in contrast to her, he has nothing to do or want or like, as he says he'll master the art of slacking off. She says she's relieved now that she's seeing someone beneath him, which hurts Hazeby at first, but he understands, though she then says that if his attitude is too casual, his life will end up unfulfilled, which does hurt him now. Later, Miyoshi thinks to herself that she's off now, but then Tanaka arrives and asks her if she'd marry her grandson. Miyoshi ends up shocked at this, as Tanaka tries to convince her, so she tries changing the subject to no avail. Later, during break, she tells the others what happened. Lucy asks if this happens often, so Hazeby says he sometimes gets asked that during field surveys, and that it happens to Ichimiya as well, but this only makes Chihaya burn in anger. Miyoshi doesn't want to date anyone though, so she ends up frustrated as she doesn't know what to do, saying that when she used to reject boys, it almost always ended up crying, as we see that back then someone proposed to her, but as she thought he revalued himself as there were other girls better than her, she told the guy to take a look in the mirror and think again, which made him cry. But Chihaya then recommends meeting up with Tanaka's grandson anyways, but as she describes that her grandson is a 22 years old responsible banker, Hazeby becomes worried and tells her that maybe she shouldn't, though then leaves wondering if it's actually a different person. Though then Miyoshi thinks to herself that if she gets married and becomes a housewife, she'll have time to go back to school, but she then begins slamming her head against the table and calls herself a terrible person. So at this, they tell her not to take Tanaka's proposal so serious, but that if she is, to make sure she doesn't get a heart attack after she rejects her. So the next day, Miyoshi listens to Tanaka again as she tells her she has no intention of getting married. Tanaka understands but says that she'll bring his grandson there the next time, to Miyoshi's dismay. Episode 7. Chihaya goes to Toko's house as she tells her she'll use her as her plaything, though then tries to say she didn't say that. Ichimiya is not home as usual, so Toko asks to play a game with her. So Chihaya makes her bet that the loser has to do what the winner says, which Toko accepts, but Toko then loses at every game they play as she slowly makes her cosplay into one of the magical flowers. Ichimiya then arrives and becomes surprised at seeing them, but as he says she can play with Toko, she approaches him, telling him that she's only doing so because he won't play with her, which shocks Ichimiya to the core as she then leaves. The next day at work, Chihaya is still mad at him, and while working with Hazeby after he asks many questions, he reveals that she was the one who asked Ichimiya out, but that he's nice, though she says this in an irritable tone. Meanwhile, Kenzo asks Chihaya if she dislikes Ichimiya, which she denies. But as he believes they don't get along, he tries to have her be nice to him, but just so she can be more cordial in general though, which makes her pull his ears in anger. But regardless, he goes through with it. So later, they're now alone there, though Ichimiya calls this troublesome, though saying that she's trying harder than him at keeping the secret. But Chihaya gets angry at this, saying that he's too nice, so she begins taking off her clothes to his shock and corners him. But then they notice that Lucy's been watching this. But Chihaya saves the situation by saying that she only got a little lightheaded, so Ichimiya held her, which Lucy obliviously believes. Later, Ichimiya apologizes through his phone, asking her to talk after work. But then, as Chihaya approaches him, Kenzo asks him to stay a little longer, which he ends up accepting to her discontent as he sees her leave angry. Meanwhile, Kanan is shopping with Toko as they talk about her brother. Toko says she's worried he doesn't have a girlfriend and only friends, as she says he goes out for drinks, sneaks around talking on the phone, and turns blue once she asks who he's talking with, as Kanan realizes he does have a girlfriend. Chihaya then runs into them, who spend time waiting for a coworker to finish so they can go drink. Toko tells Kanan that Chihaya always goes to her house without calling first, even when only Ichimiya is there, as Kanan realizes she's his girlfriend despite Toko's obliviousness. Though Kanan then thinks that Chihaya is only using Toko as a way to see Ichimiya, so she decides to protect her. But then, Chihaya receives a call from Ichimiya, which she tells to call later as she's busy, to Toko's and Ichimiya's disbelief. Ichimiya then calls her again as he apologizes for not knowing why she's mad. This makes her smile but hangs up on him again as she tells Toko her coworker's waiting for her, so she leaves. Now there though, he ends up calling her by her last name instead of Megumi, which makes her mad again. The next day, Miyoshi is feeling down as Lucy explains that Tanaka told her she'd bring her grandson there, which makes Hazeby turn pale as he says he has a slightly bad feeling. Though Lucy thinks this is because Hazeby wants to date Miyoshi, so he pulls her cheeks in punishment. Later, Lucy meets up with Miyoshi and talk about the situation as she says that Tanaka hasn't shown up in some day. Though then, Tanaka's grandson shows up. Lucy tries to leave but can't, as Miyoshi's holding her hand firmly. So the younger Tanaka explains that he came here to apologize for her grandmother, to her relief, but that he's also there to see what she looked like, to her dismay, as he says that it's a family rule that anything his grandmother says must be followed. He then reveals that her grandma has a cold and is at home, but as Miyoshi doesn't talk, he falls for her due to being a good listener. But she tries to explain it that she was listening worried for her grandma, so he further falls for her for being kind to the elderly. Though they then begin talking normally, so she lets go of Lucy's hand and she leaves. But then Hazeby appears, so Tanaka jumps into the office out of nowhere and demands to know what he's doing there after disappearing without a trace, though Hazeby just pokes his eyes. But as he stands up and in a rage says that the time has come, Haseby tells him that lunchtime is about to end, so he instantly becomes serious and leaves back to work. After that, Tanaka's grandson ended up coming back every day since then, and one day he came with his grandma. Though he asks for Haseby again, Miyoshi tells him he went out like every other day, though he says he can feel his presence as Haseby hides from him. Later, during break, Lucy wonders why Tanaka's fixated on Haseby, as Kouhai theorizes that it's because he stole his woman, though Haseby says they were just classmates. Later, Lucy keeps wondering the why, but this box almost fall on her, but Haseby luckily saves her, as Lucy says that she got caught up thinking on him. Though then says that it's not like that, but rather because of Tanaka. So he ends up explaining that Tanaka isn't a prodigy like him, and since he hates to lose, he'd always challenge him, though would always end up losing. But he can't explain the whole thing, so he decides to leave it at that to Lucy's dismay. Though she's happy that he told in, which makes him blush as he says she's so cute he wants to further their relationship, asking her out to eat again. But she rejects him again, which leaves Haseby feeling bad. Though he still tries to convince her, as Kouhai and Miyoshi watch, but Tanaka also saw this as he came by for his grandma's purse. Miyoshi goes get it, as Kouhai tells him that Haseby is irresponsible and gaudy at work, and that he's hitting on Lucy, which shocks him, though then asks her to stop saying mean things about Hasab, and then leaves as Miyoshi hands him the purse. Miyoshi's left confused, so Kouhai tries to explain as she tells her about Ya. Episode 8. Lucy works around the office, but ends up annoyed as she keeps getting called Lucy Yamagami-chan, even hitting Haseby on the face with a book as he asks her out to dinner. So she apologizes and he asks her out again, though she says she can't because she has no money. She changes her mind as he says to go somewhere cheap. At noon, Kouhai finds Tanaka outside, who asks where is Haseby, so she tells him that she went out to eat with Lucy, but this makes him nervous for some reason. Meanwhile, Lucy and Haseby eat, as they talk about how he only eats outside, to which Lucy reproaches him for not eating properly, though she then says that she only cooks white rice, plain udon, and plain pasta, so he gets right back at her. He then tries to have her drink some alcohol, convincing her as he says he has to prepare for when her boss asks her to again. She ends up a bit tipsy and talk about why she likes books so much, as she says that she used to hide in the library when boys would tease her about her name. Haseby tells her to change it, but she refuses as it'd be disrespectful to her parents, though Haseby takes a dig at them as they were the ones who named her that, though she still blames whoever approved of it, saying that she still plans on complaining at them. Haseby tries to make her go out with him after she achieves that, though she quickly rejects him, though she now says that he's alright to his surprise, as she used to say she hated him. He then asks her if she ever wondered what it'd be like to go out with someone, so she thinks on it, but only manages to think on someone reciting her full name as she declares to her, which makes her embarrassed. They later go their own ways, as Haseby thinks that he'd like to complain to whoever approved of her name himself, since it's so hard to hit on her because of it. The next day, Haseby has to do extra hours, so Lucy leaves alone. But she runs into Tanaka, who was actually waiting for her, and asks her out to dinner. Lucy rejects that immediately, but he simply drags her out with him, which Miyoshi sees. Now at the restaurant, Lucy's nervous, but Tanaka properly introduces himself, though freaks out as he thinks Lucy called him second place for some reason. Lucy, now scared, decides to give him wine so she can escape while he's drunk, but he still appears sober, even after drinking 5 bottles. So he then talks about Haseby, saying that he was never able to beat him at anything, and that one day, after challenging each other at basketball, he told him he wasn't even trying, so he hit him with a basketball. He then says, such a horrible guy, but it turns out he's talking about himself, as the days after that, he never accepted his challenges again and locked himself at home playing video games, blaming himself for him becoming a random local civil servant, and that he's been driven to hit on such a plain girl. But as she thinks he must care a lot about Haseby, he asks her out, saying that as Haseby doesn't know failure, if she stole her from him, he'd finally win, even though Tanaka doesn't care about her. But then, Haseby appears out of nowhere and slams his head with a punch against the table, saying that Miyoshi followed them there and called him. Though then Tanaka stands up and says that he's sobered up, as he apparently was drunk. Haseby then gives him a message from Miyoshi, where she tells him that he's awful, which actually makes him sad. Now outside, Tanaka apologizes, though reveals that even sober he was planning on asking her out, so Haseby punches him again. And as they're about to leave, Tanaka says he'll apologize again through email, but Haseby punches him again as he says he hasn't even gotten her email yet. They then walk back as Lucy reveals they talked about him playing basketball, though Haseby says that that was nothing, but that because he's so responsible, he read too much into it and blamed himself, and began to follow him everywhere, even to the point of having needed to transfer schools. But as she thinks on how Haseby doesn't care about going far in life, she regardless tells him that even though it's great to have a great job, the decision of living life the day one thinks is fun is wonderful. But Haseby tells her to stop, saying that if she continues, he'll end up liking her so much it won't even be funny. So again sends her to the train station alone, as he says that he'll walk home despite it being 10 stations away, but he still goes regardless while laughing awkwardly. The next day, Miyoshi's glad that Lucy is alright, and Haseby then arrives, though Lucy notices he looks weird as he doesn't have his necktie, though he says he's going for business casual today. Though then, uncharacteristically, he ends up forgetting to do a task, so out of frustration, he decides to go slack off, though ends up doing so to Kenzo's desk. Later, he runs into Lucy having lunch and talk about what happened yesterday, so she says she wants to repay him. But at this, he remembers he was saving up his points, so he decides to use them to go on a date with her. She freaks out at this, so she tries to say that she'll be booked for the next 2 months. But Hazeby accepts to do it in that time and also asks her to wear a skirt, but as she says she can't do both, he tells her to wear the skirt to work instead. So out of options, she's about to accept the date, but then Kouhai comes and tells him that forcing a date is... But Hazeby was prepared for this and tells her that she'll let her choose Lucy's outfit for their date, so she says she's in, to Lucy's dismay as Hazeby leaves. Though we then see that he was very nervous in asking all of that. EPSOD 9. Lucy is frustrated due to her future date, so she tries talking to Kouhai, who's ignoring Kenzo and her as she fell asleep. So they decide to leave, but she then wakes up as she blames it on making so many clothes lately. Though as she remembers Lucy's date, she thinks on how she also has a boyfriend, but that she hasn't gone on a date in a long time as she stares at Ichimiya in anger. Later, as she sees Lucy and her plain style, she remembers that she also used to dress plainly 2 years ago when she began working there. Kenzo pointed it out, but ended up embarrassed as she said he'd worry about his appearance first. And then Ichimiya came and told him that she's just wearing work clothing, though he then apologized for talking about her clothes. So the next day she saw him hugging Toko, but explained that she was just her sister and then pet her, saying that she's pretty responsible while being young, though then apologizes for this. But then she asked him out, but he declined, saying that he has to raise his sister, on top of having to put her first during Christmas, but Kouhai was fine with this. Back in the present, Ichimiya runs into her, so she tells him that she'll have the cameraman taking tons of pics of her in a revealing outfit. Ichimiya tells her that when she cosplays like that to make sure she doesn't catch a cold. So at this, she drags him close and kisses him, and then slaps him and then leaves. Ichimiya though ends up frustrated as he can't bring himself to tell her not to wear outfits like that, but this pisses her off as well, since he doesn't want to complain about her hobbies as he already puts Toko first. But frustrated at all this, Kouhai decides to drag Lucy to the mall to buy her skirt. Now there, Lucy ends up embarrassed, though at not wearing clothes fit for going to a clothing store. They then run into Miyoshi and Toko, who decide to help Lucy with her choice, though she ends up rejecting everything, so they decide to go. Lucy is still iffy on all of this as she says someone like her can't wear a skirt, but Kouhai tells her it's not good to look down on herself, and then it's a bit rude to the people about him, as he thinks on Ichimiya angry. So at this, Lucy decides to do her best, though Kouhai now tells her she'll also get contact lenses for her. The next day at work, they tell Hazeby that they didn't find a skirt that fit her massive, so Kouhai will be making one for her. But then Lucy apologizes to Hazeby for looking down on him and saying that she'll now do her best to accompany him to the end, which makes him spit out his coffee, so Kouhai drags her away. Later, Lucy sees as Miyoshi listens to Tanaka's grandma again, though as she tries to talk about her grandson, she tells her not to, which she surprisingly understands. So later, they walk together, as Miyoshi says that she feels guilty for what happened, saying that if she had denied to meet Tanaka properly, Lucy wouldn't have been dragged out like that. Though Lucy tells her not to worry, saying that the food was good, to which Miyoshi says that she's easily drawn in by food. But then Kaoru runs into her, who tells her to go get some food. So they go, with Miyoshi, and talk about Tanaka. She realizes that he only asked Lucy out to win against Hazeby, but Miyoshi ends up more angered at him at hearing this. Though Kaoru explains that because of the basketball incident, he told her the best way he can repay Hazeby is by beating him. So he tried to have a girlfriend before he does, and even asked her out back then, which she immediately declined, and then explains that he's gotten worse since then, even wanting to know where he transferred to. Though she then changes topics and tells him something. The next day, Miyoshi gives Hazeby paperwork as she tells her that yesterday she went out with Lucy, but Toko shouts and drowns her voice, though she continues, saying that she heard from her that she's getting married. This leaves him dumbfounded as he wants an explanation, though she tells him she said he'd find out eventually, which leaves him shocked. Kenzo heard this and told Hazeby he'd celebrate, but he was still in shock. Lucy then approaches him as he sees her super sparkly, so he asks why is she so happy. So she asks if he's heard, saying that she tried so many times to no avail, but that she didn't give up, and then the other day her wish came true, making her really happy as Hazeby only stares at her. He then ends up fumbling his work and ends up an empty husk as he then strips Kenzo off his fur out of frustration. Later, he meets up with Lucy, and he asks her who is it. So she reveals that it's an actor she doesn't know, but this leaves him confused as she finally reveals she finally won a Tasho card, and as they're talking about happy, she tells him that she heard that her sister is getting married, as it was Kaoru's name the thing Toko drowned out. So he throws his phone in anger at the floor, being embarrassed at himself. It ends up breaking, though he says he was planning on buying a new one anyways, and wanted to erase all of the girl's emails in her phone as well. But as Lucy says he keep the important ones, he says that she doesn't get it, saying that he doesn't need any other girl than her as he leaves the room. though ends up frustrated as he didn't ask Lucy for her email again. Episode 10. Kouhai visits Toko, with the plan of revealing that she's dating her brother. Now inside, she takes out a bunch of pastries so Toko can be calm, and begins with idle talk, asking her if Ichimiya isn't around the age to start marrying. But this makes Toko sad, and makes her say that that's why she'll be a civil servant, so she can live on her own and not be on Ichimiya's way anymore, and begins to cry, so Kouhai calms her down. But then she finally reveals that she's going out with Ichimiya. But Toko only ends up hearing that they were going out at each other, as she falls asleep but then she notices Toko has a book of college questions, which she doesn't need to take the civil rights exam. But then, Kouhai ends up falling asleep as well. Later, Ichimiya arrives home and becomes surprised at seeing them both sleeping, so he separates them as later Kouhai wakes up. Ichimiya wants to know why she's here, but she chooses to keep it a secret. But as he tells her she must get along well with Toko, Kouhai asks if she wants to go at it with her, scaring him. The next day at work, Kouhai talks with Miyoshi about Toko, wondering if she actually wants to be a civil servant, though Miyoshi says she must want to have her options open. Though then, Miyoshi tells her it must be difficult to be always worried for Toko and her boyfriend Ichimiya, which shocks Kouhai as she knew her secret, though she tells her it was just common sense, as Kouhai thinks that she let her guard down because of Lucy's cluelessness. Regardless, she tells her to make sure she doesn't regret worrying about the two of them too much. At noon, Miyoshi leaves work and runs into Tanaka, though she chooses to ignore him, though he then stops her and asks why does she want nothing with him, so she says that she feels she'll regret having anything to do with him. So he lets her go as he says that regrets are bad, though he's actually waiting for Hazeby. But as he left home already, he says he'll ask Lucy out to make up for the other day, though this makes Miyoshi think that he's an The next day, Kouhai hears Toko trying to drag his brother out to shopping, which frustrates her, due to worrying about them, as Kenzo arrives and says that surely no one can come between those brothers, which makes Kouhai step on him. Lucy sees this, so she recommends not worrying about others too much, as she might end up regretting it, comparing it to missing out on a book because she was too nice, which makes Kouhai think that she might be right, though she then tells her that she'll be making her date close without holding anything back now. At noon, Miyoshi talks with Tanaka, who tells him to leave Lucy and Hazeby alone and they don't want to be involved with him, but this only makes him want to do something so they'll forgive him, or he'll regret it. Though with this, Miyoshi tells him that what he's doing is not atonement, but rather self-satisfaction, which shocks Tanaka, though then says that he regrets his actions and drops to the floor crying in front of everyone, saying that he doesn't want to have more regrets, though Miyoshi now regrets having told him this. The next morning, she appears pale, as she reveals that because of regrets, she ended up accepting going to dinner with Tanaka. Later, Kanon goes to the ward office to meet with Toko, though she finds her scolding Miyoshi again, so she decides to wander through the office time. And as she does so, she ends up running into Hazeby like 3 times as he's slacking off, though Ichimiya busts him. Later, she runs into Lucy, who sees is just eating plain pasta, and then into Kouhai, though she tries to avoid her due to awkwardness. Then Kouhai stops her to ask for her measurements so she can cosplay, but she runs away. Then, Ichimiya informs Kenzo of his daughter's here, so he decides to go find her. Though then, he goes to Miyoshi and talks to her, but didn't realize that Toko is there, though she only heard his voice, and then sees a stuffed rabbit just laying there, so Miyoshi tells her it's the ward mascot, though Toko says that he isn't cute, which makes Kenzo angry, though she then decides to leave. But then she sees she forgot her phone, so she comes back, but ends up finding Miyoshi, talking with Kenzo. But as she can't hear them, this only makes her think that she's crazy for talking to a stuffed animal, though then everyone else, including Ichimiya, come and talk to it, making her wonder if they're all crazy and blaming herself for being too hard on them. After that, Toko runs into Kanon, though she's crying, saying that she saw everyone talking to a stuffed animal, as Kanon realizes she means her dad. So she tries to console her by saying that civil servants have psychological problems, but this only makes it worse as Hazeby then comes and she begins crying at him as well. So he takes both of them to Ichimiya, and Toko explains that she saw them talking to a stuffed bunny. But then Lucy comes talking to Kenzo, who's now talking, which Toko notices, so she ends up busting him. So Kenzo chooses to introduce himself, but this only makes Toko scream that they're wasting the people's money on this, as she then leaves running, while Kanon chases after her. The next day, Toko hasn't done anything, so Kanon drops her dad by as he tells them that her daughter thinks his employers are weird, but they think Unison that he's weirder. Episode 11. Hazeby tries to avoid Lucy as he thinks it's awkward. Though as a result of this, Lucy begins to worry and begins asking everyone where is he, though they all just tell her he's surely slacking off. Until she finds Kenzo, who tells her places where he's most likely at right now, as he also slacks in them, and decides to go with her to find him. They go to the inner courtyard, where they find a bazaar being held there, so they check it out. But as Lucy checks out some stuffed animals, she then notices that Kenzo is gone. So she goes for help and explains that the salesperson mistook him for merchandise and sold him, though they only gifted her a stuffed bunny as a result of that. Though at first they don't worry because him missing wouldn't make a difference in the office, To Lucy's disappointment, they end up trying to find him everywhere, but to no avail. Out of habit, Lucy ends up talking to the stuffed rabbit, which Toko sees worried, though then Lucy explains what happened. So she tells her to look in the library, though Lucy ends up delighted as she didn't know the office had one. So she goes and indeed she finds him. But as Kenzo doesn't move, she gets close, so Kenzo explains that he's decided to be her doll forever, since he doesn't want to make her sad. But then Lucy explains what happened to the girl and her mother, so she tries to swap Kenzo out for the other doll. But as they seem not to want it, Kenzo thinks to himself that he's sorry to his family, only for the girl to take the other doll to his shock and ends up depressed afterwards. After that, Lucy decides to find Hazeby again. Later, Hazeby goes to the roof to eat and finds Lucy there, who's eating bread crusts, who ends up embarrassed at this. So he gives her the sandwich, and then she tells him that she went there to find him, explaining that the other day she panicked as she isn't used to being around guys since she switched to an all-girls school because everyone mocked her name when younger. So at this, Hazeby tells her that girls like her may be an easy target for gaudy guys like him, but he ends up depressed at saying this. So Lucy tries to cheer him up, saying that he's pessimistic instead of gaudy, which just makes it worse. So she then tells him that he's actually nice, and that she likes how calming him being kinda gloomy is, which makes him blush. Though then she apologizes for saying this and tells him that he must be nice to everyone as well, though Hazeby responds with that she's special, which makes her cover his face in shame and then escapes from there, as Hazeby is left thinking that he must now be paying for the fact that he lived a carefree life. The next day, Miyoshi regrets having accepted to going out with Tanaka, but she decides to be positive and decides to spend the day out. Though as she didn't have any plans, she goes into a library where she sees Lucy's Hojo. She can tell what's going on thanks to its movement. And then she runs into her, who explains what just happened, confirming what she thought. Later, she sees Hazeby, who with eyes plays an arcade game, though quickly changes moods as she notices her. He explains that he got mad over a game, so without thinking, she tells him that if he has time to do that, he'd ask Lucy out, which feels like a stab to his heart. She then leaves as Hazeby now thinks he's a loser, though plays the game again as everyone now cheers his performance. Then, she runs into Chihaya, who's buying pastries to change the moods of a conversation. Afterwards, she runs into Ichimiya, who tells her that Toko's studying so he went outside. But at this, Miyoshi tells him he'd ask his girlfriend out instead. Hurt, he says he's unsure if he'd be the one inviting her out, so Miyoshi says it'd be harder for her to do so. Hurt again, she tries to explain that she's always at his house with Toko, so she responds with that she's surely going there to see him as well, which further damages him. After all this, she wonders if she'll end up meeting with Kenzo as well, which she does, who's begging his daughter to buy him donuts. And as she thinks she's going to run into Tanaka, she does, but rather the elder one, who begins talking to her, to her dismay. So the next day, she ends up exhausted as she then explains to the girls that she has a date with the younger Tanaka, to their surprise. At noon, Hazeby runs into Tanaka outside, who tells him not to do anything weird to Miyoshi, though Tanaka ends up confused at what he means. And then they go on their date as they all watch him. Now in a restaurant, she watches as he drinks wine, as she can't, again and again, as he only talks about Hazeby. So she tries to change the topic, but as he doesn't know what to talk about, he tries to talk about portfolio management services, which she laughs at. But then, as he remembers he wanted to talk about regrets, Miyoshi passes out as she drank wine without thinking. So he carries her back home, but she wakes up midway. As they say goodbye, Tanaka asks to do this again, which Miyoshi agrees to. Episode 12. Lucy worries about her date with Hazeby, as it's close. Though then notices Chihaya is falling asleep, who explains that she's almost done making her cosplay outfits, so she's been sleeping on the floor, otherwise she wouldn't wake up, though then lays on Lucy's boobs as she says she misses her pillow, as Miyoshi tells her those aren't a pillow. Lucy feels bad as Chihaya is also making her outfit, though at this Chihaya assertively tells her that more than cosplaying, she loves making outfits, so she offers Miyoshi to make one for her, but scared, she declines, so Kenzo then comes and asks for an outfit, but she quickly shuts him down as she isn't interested in clothes for stuffed animals, to his dismay. But then, she informs him she'll be taking 3 days off starting tomorrow so she can finish her cosplays. Later, Kenzo tells the guys about this, and as Ichimiya looks surprised, Chihaya approaches him, who tells him not to have any contact with her during the next few days, in an attempt to have him worry as Hazeby notices this, but he only says got it, to their dismay. On the 3rd day of her break, Toko visits the ward office again and tells Ichimiya to go out shopping with her. Though Ichimiya lies, saying that he's going out drinking with Hazeby later, as she gives him a look and later goes visit Chihaya. But as no one's answering, she goes in and finds Chihaya laying on the floor, who thinks she's... Later, she reminds him she told him not to come, saying that she looks awful, though Ichimiya says that she doesn't look any different, so she him with a table again. But Ichimiya offers help around the house as she finishes, which she accepts. So later she's done and then decides to do it with Ichimiya, though ends up falling asleep on him to his dismay as he now can't go home. The next day, Hazeby and Miyoshi notice Ichimiya is wearing the same clothes as yesterday and that he looks tired, so they thank him for his hard work, though he denies their thinking. Later, Chihaya shows Lucy her new outfit, though notices that it's too short, so Chihaya says that she was too tired and mistook the length, but then that she won't be able to fix it as the date's tomorrow, as Lucy realizes she did it on purpose. She then tells her that Hazeby most likely asked her out to mess with her, so she warns her to see if he's a decent guy or not tomorrow. But as Lucy wants an explanation, she says that a decent guy is someone who can properly care for a woman, but this makes her think on Ichimiya, who behaved like a total with her, so she ends up mad. Though then, Chihaya has her try the outfit and she does, but ends up embarrassed and says that she can't do this but can't cancel as she never exchanged numbers with Hazeby. The next day, Hazeby arrives to the date, but Lucy takes too long, so he starts blaming Chihaya for this as he thinks the fit she made was too. But then she arrives in her new dress and using contacts. So they begin their date, though then Hazeby buys her fashion glasses as he says he really likes glasses and takes a picture, but she ends up embarrassed and wants to leave, though he wins her back by taking her to a bookstore. There though, she remembers to see what kind of guy Hazeby is. Meanwhile, Chihaya and Toko have a meal outside, and as Toko, to Chihaya's surprise, wonders if her brother has a girlfriend, Chihaya decides she'll tell her about her and Ichimiya. Though then, she sees Hazeby and Lucy enter the same food joint, so she drags Toko away from there as she thinks it'll be awkward. After that, Lucy notices that Hazeby is treating her really well, which makes her think that he's so used to girls, so she tries to run away in fear, but slips as she's wearing heels. Meanwhile, Toko tells Chihaya that she doesn't mind if her brother has a girlfriend and says that she needs to be independent for him to be free, so she needs to ace her test as she says she's causing him so much trouble and doesn't want him to hold back. And meanwhile, Hazeby treats to Lucy's sprain, though she hits him as he says he can look up her skirt. So at this, Lucy tries to convince herself that Hazeby's being the same as usual. Though then, he offers her candy, but ends up sneakily holding her hand as he asks her to go out with him, but she ends up using her name as an excuse to avoid the topic, so he asks what does she think of him. But then, Hazeby receives a call, and upon hanging, he reveals that his sister's fiancé is visiting his family today, so his father is demanding him to go despite Kaoru having told him it was fine. But as he doesn't want to leave, Lucy promises him to redo the date another time, so he agrees and finally leaves. The next day, she runs into Hazeby as she's now nervous, but sees that Hazeby is only acting normal, which makes her sad. Though Hazeby ends up messing his work throughout the day and isn't even slacking off, so his friends meet up and theorize why this is happening. So Chihaya brings him in, and he reveals that he found out his dad was the one who approved Lucy's name, to which Chihaya gives a cold ha. Episode 13. As Kenzo and Lucy see the others are missing, they decide to go find them, though Toko busts them, as she says she won't allow them to slack off. Meanwhile, Chihaya teases Hazeby with the reveal, which makes his soul leave his body. Hazeby, all fuzzy, explains that when he went to his parents' place yesterday, after finding his future brother-in-law passed out from drinking, his sister mentioned Lucy, so his father said that that was the same name of a girl with a very rare name he approved of, as he begins listing Lucy's names, which made him spit his drink. Though his father explained that that day, Hazeby was in the hospital with a high fever, so he couldn't concentrate at work, saying that usually he'd ask, "Are you really sure?" which made Hazeby realize that it's his fault. This shocks them all, but Chihaya only gives out a cold ha again, which makes Hazeby's soul leave his body again. Meanwhile, Toko scolds Kenzo for being the section manager while being a bunny as Kanon arrives, so she tries to defend him. But then, as Kanon thinks Toko realized Kenzo is her dad, she only tells her that liking stuffed animals is in bad taste, as Kanon thinks she's glad Toko isn't. So Kenzo and Lucy leave after that, glad that it's over, though then run into the elder Tanaka, to their dismay. Meanwhile, Ichimiya tries to say that Hazeby's not responsible, as he didn't know he'd catch a cold, though he says that it is Hazeby's fault, as in his dad. Miyoshi then tries to say that Lucy might not be resentful, though Hazeby says that he's been rejected over her name over and over already, but Miyoshi says that that might be because she doesn't like him, which just makes it worse. So they say they have to tell her, but Hazeby refuses as he doesn't want her to hate him. Though they're then found by Kenzo and Lucy, so they all leave to work as Hazeby only side views her, which makes her hose hit Kenzo. Later, Lucy wonders to her friends if she did something wrong during their date, though at this, Chihaya implies that Hazeby's the one who did something wrong. This makes Lucy remember how she told him Hazeby was only toying with her. Later, as Lucy thinks on Hazeby's behavior during the morning, he runs into her, but instead of calling her Lucy, she calls her Yamagami, to her shock. He tries to excuse it with that she didn't like being called that, but she says it'd be awkward at this point. So she asks him to please call her Lucy, which makes him think that she's cute. But then she mentions how he left to his parents' house, which brings him crashing down, though she notices this and apologizes, but Hasib ends up frustrated. So they then avoid each other during the day and behave awkwardly with each other, even with Lucy fondly remembering how Haseby used to ask her out and annoyed her. At noon, Haseby's still frustrated, so Kouhai tells him that he's pathetic, and that he wasn't serious if he's depressed over this, warning him to not ever talk to Lucy again, as Miyoshi says that she finished him off. But then, as she sees Lucy leaving, she changes her mind and demands him to talk to her. Ichimiya recommends him it'll be better if he reveals the secret early, as it'll be harder the more time passes, so he decides to go. Though as Kouhai stares at Ichimiya intensely because of what he said, Ichimiya decides he'll do better for her, and that he'll tell Toko about them, though then gets nervous when she asks when. Meanwhile, Haseby rushes to Lucy and finds her, and as the others peek, he struggles to say it, though Lucy misunderstands and tells him to not hold back in saying any concerns she has about her, besides her name. But at this, he ends up screaming that he can't tell her that the one who approved her name was his dad. But as he realizes what he just said, he explains that it's because he had a fever, so he was distracted at work, blaming himself over it. But Lucy understands and says that it's not his fault, as anyone can get a fever. But as he keeps blaming himself, she ends up accepting that and tells him that since it's his fault that she ended up liking him calling her Lucy, to make it up to her by still calling her Lucy. So with this, Haseby holds her hand and tries to tell her something, but then Tanaka arrives, but Miyoshi drags him away. And then Toko and Kanan appear, but Ishimiya takes them somewhere else. And then Kenzo appears, who is stepped on by Kouhai and taken away. And later, outside, he asks her out again, but she declines, though says not yet. But then Tanaka, alongside everyone from the office, go and interrupt them. In the post-credits, we see Ichijima trying to tell Toko about him and Kouhai, but failing. Miyoshi scolding Tanaka about not interrupting people. Kouhai forcing Lucy to wear a cosplay as repayment for making her outfit. Hazuka and Kaoru asking Lucy out for dinner. Kanan doing maintenance to his dad. And Haseby happy as everyone keeps up with their work. In the end, Haseby ends up finally getting Lucy's email to go out with him.